Morning and welcome to the MAG Transportation Policy Committee. This meeting is now called to order, and for those who are seated in this room around the table, please remember to turn your microphone on so those who are addressing us telephonically or virtually can also participate and hear you. For those who are participating on Zoom, please remember to unmute your device before speaking and mute when you're not speaking so that we don't have to listen to your dogs or anything else going on. Phone participants should use *6 to mute and unmute and *9 to raise your hand. The MAG public comment process provides opportunities for members of the public to comment on items scheduled on today's agenda or on items that fall under MAG's jurisdiction. 3 opportunities are provided for public comment, including call to the audience and consent agenda and action items to be heard. MAG also provides the opportunities for members of the public to submit written comments via the MAG website prior to the meeting, as long as the comments are received at least 1 hour prior to the posted start time in the meeting. So if you would like to comment at today's meeting, please fill out a white request speaker card located on the information table in the hallway, and be sure to indicate the item for which you want to speak and give it to a designated MAG staff member. And those of us here, if you've parked in the garage, remember to validate your ticket. Parking validators are available on the information table in the hallway. And for those who purchased a transit ticket to come to the meeting, please see the staff for a ticket. And please note that hearing assisted devices are available from MAG staff. Would now like to open our meeting with a roll call of all members. And with that, I'll turn this over to Linda.
Thank you, Chair. When I call your name, please indicate you are here for the record. Rock Arnett.
I'm here.
Thank you. David Barry. Jen Daniels.
Here.
Thank you. Doug DeCluson.
Here.
Thank you. Tom Duran.
Here.
Thank you. Mayor Gallego.
Here.
Thank you. Mayor Giles, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Here.
Thank you. Mayor Hall.
I'm here.
Thank you. Mayor Hartke.
Here.
Thank you. Charles Huelmantel.
I'm here.
Thank you. Ricardo Leonard. Eric Osborne. Mayor Osborne.
Present.
Thank you. Mayor Peterson.
Present.
Thank you. Councilmember Stipp.
Present.
Thank you. Mayor Price. Mark Reardon.
Here.
Thank you. Supervisor Sellers. Mayor Wires.
I'm here.
Thank you. Mayor Weiss.
Here.
Thank you. Mayor Woods. Is there anyone I have missed? Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you. Would you please stand and join me in our Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Item 3 in our agenda is a call to the audience. And again, this is an opportunity for the public to comment on items that fall under MAG's jurisdiction that are not on the agenda or that are on the agenda for discussion and not for action. Members of the public who are attending in person may deliver their comments from the lectern in front of the room. You have up to 3 minutes to complete your comments. A timer is provided to assist you. When the light of the timer changes from green to yellow, you have 1 minute remaining. If the light turns red, a buzzer will sound, meaning your allotted time has expired. I have received 1 card from Bob Brown. And so, Bob, you're welcome to come up. Have we received any additional cards or anything online?
Chair, we have not received any other public comment cards for any other item.
Okay. Hello, sir. You've got 3 minutes.
Hi, as mentioned, I'm Bob Brown. I own a business with a little less than 100 employees that lives within the distance of the Broadway curve. I also live in the neighborhood, and I've kept track of the things that are happening on Broadway curve And I was shocked to find out that the interchange baseline is not part of this, in which I conversed with several people from MAG over the last year as to why not. And all I could be told is, gee, it's going to be in the next round of improvements. And they sent me the spine study, which I studied carefully. And I saw that there was a conceptual plan for a double diamond interchange, moving Wendler Street, and all of the complexities that go with that. And I keep saying, well, why did this can get kicked down the road? I watched all the improvements along the Black Canyon. I read the spine that said this is the second most congested intersection along the spine. It's the second priority according to the MAG study, and yet it keeps getting kicked down the road. And nobody can tell me why, and I don't understand it. I've talked over and over and over again. I met with Tom Bullard, who was very kind, explained to me as much as he possibly could, but no one can tell me who made the decision to keep kicking this down the road. I guess the people of South Phoenix just don't have a loud enough voice to be heard. The truth of the matter is this should be fast-tracked. Tom tells me that they're doing the design work on it. I'm trying to avoid having 4 years of construction followed by 3 more years of construction at that intersection. It's ridiculous. So I would encourage you to fast track it as fast as you can and get that done thing over with before the Broadway curve gets over with. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And staff, related to this, if you could provide to council comments and anything to him as well. So I appreciate that. Committee, we're not a council, are we? Changing my hats here. Thank you, sir. Next item on our agenda is the approval of the consent agenda. Does any member of the committee have questions or would like to request a presentation on any of the items on consent? Seeing none here, none online rearing up. So prior to approval of the consent agenda, do we have any members who wish to comment on the consent agenda items? Seeing none. All right. We have no speaker cards also related to this. Hearing none. Is there a motion to approve the consent items, item 4A and 4B, please?
Motion to approve. Second.
We have a motion by Mayor Orsborn and a second by Mayor Weiss. All right. Can I have a voice vote of those in this room? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Hearing none. Linda, please do a voice vote for those who are participating virtually.
Thank you, Chair. When I call your name, please indicate how you vote. Jen Daniels.
Aye.
Thank you. Doug DeCluson.
Aye.
Thank you. Mayor Hall.
Aye.
Thank you. Charles Huelmantel.
Aye.
Thank you. Mayor Peterson.
Aye.
Thank you. Have I missed anybody?
Aye, Dave Barry.
Thank you, Dave. Chair, the motion passes unanimously.
All right, thank you. So we've approved items 4A and 4B. Next on our agenda is item 5, Infrastructure and Investment Jobs Act. So we have a presentation by Patrick Stone, MAG Transportation Improvement Program Supervisor. And this is on our agenda for information only. Sir.
Good morning, Chair Harkey, members of TPC. Pleasure to be here with you. Excuse me, to be here with you today. Next slide, please. So I wanted to start today's presentation with a brief rundown. First, I'm going to do a high-level overview of federal transportation funding, briefly touch base on IIJA, or the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act, talk about our historical discretionary funding approach. We'll pivot then to a proposed discretionary funding approach. And then finally, I'll have a brief overview of both current and upcoming grant opportunities. If I could get the next slide, please. So federal transportation funding in the region actually flows through 2 paths, as evidenced on the slide. First are those formula funds that come to MAG either as a pass-through from ADOT or they're directly sub-allocated to MAG. And then second, and the emphasis of my presentation today, is that federal discretionary grant funding. Next slide, please. So quickly, IIJA, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the bipartisan infrastructure law bill, it's all the same thing. What I really wanted to emphasize were the bottom 2 points on this slide. First, on the left, this did significantly increase funding, both formula and discretionary. And then second, and to the presentation today, not only do we have the existing grant opportunities, we have a handful of new grant opportunities that are of interest to the region. Next slide, please. So I wanted to give a historical overview of how MAG is traditionally discretionary grants. We've supported member agencies as they've had those discretionary grants, specifically regional letters of support for RAISE, which was Build, which was Tiger. Mayor Gallego gets that. Yeah, and we saw this last month. This actually came through regional council. We approved letters of support for member agencies related to the RAISE process for fiscal year 2022. Prior to that current practice, there was an attempt made to actually support a singular regional project. For other grant programs, those letters of support were provided on an as-needed basis. What we have here is a unique opportunity with IIJA and with all those new discretionary grant programs to perhaps refine our process and make some improvements. Next slide, please. So before I get into the proposed solutions, I wanted to set some context of what you're really looking at are 2 buckets here. The first, regional, those high dollar capital intensive projects traditionally found in both the freeway and the transit lifecycle programs. And then second, the local projects. Those are those more regionally focused, specific type of grants that are a part of the sub-allocated funding that the region receives. Next slide, please. So first I wanted to start talking about the regional projects. As I mentioned previously, these are capital intensive grants. This is a focus, you'll see it in an upcoming slide, of the new triple grant opportunity for infra, mega, and rural. These grants require significant non-federal funding, and the big part, high levels of coordination with all partners. These grants are not easy to do, they're not easy to get, but they do have a benefit. Awards of these grants actually have the benefit of the region of accelerating projects. Next slide, please. Local grants, typically smaller, community focused, very specific. And you'll see this as I get to a subsequent slide. A lot of this is driven by the evaluation criteria. So these grants have very specific evaluation criteria that say we're looking for a certain type of project. Next slide, please. So proposed approach. So there's a 3-pronged approach here. They kind of lead into each other. First, and you'll hear this a couple times coming up, I apologize in advance, awaiting guidance from USDOT. We have a lot of new grant programs that we don't know actually what the grant program is other than what's contained in the law. They've not provided either a NOFO or any sort of guidance document to say, this is what we intended when we said we're going to do this type of grant. But one thing MAG has done, and I really wanted to take a moment here, take a pause, shout out to our transportation performance folks. They have been developing the tools that will allow us to respond to these NOFOs, to these opportunities. And what we're really looking at is being able to twofold. One, screen regional projects. We can find those best regional projects that will compete against the criteria that are identified. And then second, we'll be able to evaluate the applicability of these tools for local projects. Do we have projects that make more sense than others as we look at these discrete grant opportunities? And then I think this is kind of brings it all together. It's an iterative process. A lot of these grants are new this cycle. We've never seen them. We don't know anything about them. However, as we see the NOFOs, and more importantly, as we see what projects get awarded, we'll have a lot more information and understanding of what USDOT values when they do these grants. Next slide, please. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through, I've got a handful of slides. First, current grant opportunities. 2 that are out there right now. The one, the Mpdg Grant. This is the triple grant. So this combines both the existing infra grant along with the new mega grant and the new rural grant. An agency or an applicant could submit one application for all 3 grant opportunities. They do have some different requirements of each. $2.9 billion is available. Applications are due May 23rd. One thing I really want to emphasize, and it really comes to the mega grant, it's kind of built into the name. These are for large projects. 50% of the funding is for projects that cost between 100 and 500 million. 50% is for projects that cost in excess of 500 million. And then second on the slide, we have I love this one, the low-no grant, which is the low or no emission facilities. And then for buses and bus facilities, a total of 1.5 billion available. Applications due at the end of May 31st. Next slide, please. So these next few slides I'll go through fairly quickly. These are all in your agenda packet. These are just the grants that are upcoming still this year. We've not seen anything on them. We have a bridge investment program, a new grant for $2.5 billion. They do expect the NOFO to be released next month in May. Reconnecting communities, smaller grant, $100 million. The NOFO should be in June. And then Safe Streets and Roads for All. This is a $1 billion grant program, another new grant program. They expect the NOFO to be next month in May. Next slide, please. A few more grants. The SMART grant, that will come out in September. Electric vehicle charging, we've seen some guidance on this. We haven't seen anything about the NOFO yet. They said it would be in 2022. They've not said when. And then finally, Congestion Relief, another small grant program, $50 million. We should see a NOFO sometime in 2022. Next slide, please. Final three grants, Consolidated Rail Infrastructure, also is called the PRISI grant. There's about $1 billion available. We haven't seen a NOFO, but based on when they did the NOFO for last year and when they did the awards, that should hopefully come out at the end of calendar year 2022. Protect, this is an interesting one because this is a new formula program and also a new discretionary grant program. So we don't know what this grant will be. It's the resiliency program, $250 million. And then finally, the railroad crossing elimination program, $600 million. And again, we're still waiting on guidance on the NOFO. Next slide, please. And Mr. Chair, with that concludes my presentation. I'd certainly be available for any questions you or the committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for our presenter? Mayor Gay.
Mayor Peterson and I were able to visit Pima County where they convened a rail conference and talked about Amtrak. And one of the things that the gentleman from our Amtrak liaison said was that they would love to see enthusiasm from organizations like MAG about connecting our regions. So I just put that forward as something that I think many of my fellow mayors, Mayor Osborne is nodding, have already been working on, but one that I would love for us to continue to put at this organization's forefront. I think the economic development and other potential related to that project is very exciting. Gilbert's way ahead of Phoenix and has already planned station types, so we're going to try to catch up.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments? All right. Thank you, sir. I think many of us will certainly be applying for several of those. So I know we're already looking at it.
Thanks.
Next on our agenda, item number 6. Presentation by Quinn Castro, MAG Transportation Engineer. And this also is for information and discussion. Quinn.
Thank you, Mayor Hartke. Good afternoon, Transportation Policy Committee. I'm here to provide an update on the Interstate 10 Loop 202 to State Route 387 improvement. Next slide, please. So as you know, the MAG Regional Council approved Momentum 2050 Transportation Plan on December 1st of 2021. And as part of the RTP, significant improvements to the 26-mile portion of I-10 between Loop 202 and State Route 387. This section of I-10 was constructed in the 1960s, and ADOT has been working to expand and modernize this facility over the last 20 years in response to significant growth in Maricopa, Pinal, and Pima counties. And while the portion between Casa Grande and Tucson has recently been widened to 3 lanes in each direction, the section between Phoenix and Casa Grande still only has 2 lanes and continues to experience heavy congestion. And so improvements are needed in this area to improve consistency and reliability in travel time, increase capacity in response to traffic and freight demand through the corridor, improve safety in a corridor that already experiences a heavy rate and severity of crashes, and reduce diversion of traffic onto local community roads and land. Next slide, please. So this slide is an example, or rather a preview of high-level steps in the project development process. First, you have the design concept and environmental assessment, which includes the determination of need, development of alternatives, and the selection of an alternative, including a baseline comparison to a no build, and the environmental documentation of a project, which includes the assessment of impacts. Concurrent with your final design, which is shown next, is the identification of right-of-way impacts. This corridor on I-10 is unique in that the freeway itself resides on an easement within Gila River Indian Community land. And then you have construction. Next slide, please. The first phase of that development process is currently underway, initiated with 2 studies on I-10. So again, this section represents the last section between Phoenix and Tucson that has not been widened from its original 2-lane configuration. ADOT has initiated 2 engineering and environmental studies, one that covers the corridor itself, and a second that is specific to the I-10 bridges over the Gila River. These studies are being conducted in collaboration with the Gila River Indian Community, Federal Highway Administration, Bureau of Indian Affairs, and MAG. Next slide, please. The corridor study kicked off in the fall of 2019 with public and agency scoping. Scoping is an opportunity for the public and stakeholders to provide information about the corridor to the study team, as well as share issues or concerns about the project or project area. Feedback provided during scoping helped inform the development of 2 build alternatives in addition to the no build alternative. Both build alternatives would widen I-10 from 2 to 3 lanes in each direction, as well as provide improvements to existing interchanges and overcrossings of I-10. These 3 alternatives were presented to the public for comment in October of 2020. So there are additional study efforts that are underway, including cultural resource investigation, coordination with GRTI, which is Gila River Telecommunications, and a series of meetings with public safety and first responders. Next slide, please. So currently the study team is in the process of preparing their draft design concept report and environmental assessment. These are expected to be available for review and public comment prior to a public hearing that is planned for this fall. The completed design concept report and environmental assessment are expected in early 2023. Next slide, please. So concurrent with the corridor study, ADOT has initiated a study to repair or replace the I-10 bridges over the Gila River. These bridges are also currently 2 lanes in each direction and would be hopefully widened to 3 lanes in each direction. The study has held public and agency scoping meetings, as well as a value engineering to help refine the scope of work. And the efforts include hydrology, hydraulics, environmental clearance, cultural resources investigation, again, coordination with GRTI, and the Tribal Historic Preservation Office. The ADOT study team expects that the project assessment will be completed this spring and move directly into final design. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the corridor itself, as well as the funded and unfunded elements. The funded elements are shown here in blue, or in color rather. The entire portion of I-10 between Loop 202 and State Route 387 falls within MAG's planning area. Approximately 6 miles of the 26-mile corridor fall within Maricopa County, while the remaining 20 miles are Pinal County. And based on estimates from last month, the total cost to implement the entirety of the improvements as part of the I-10 Wild Horse Pass corridor and the I-10 bridges over the Gila River is about $807 million expressed in 2022 dollars. So funding to widen the Maricopa County section of the corridor has been identified as part of the Prop 400 freeway program, including the addition of 1 general purpose lane in each direction and 1 HOV lane in each direction. Improvements to the interchange at I-10 and State Route 347 is also identified in the Prop 400 program, while funding to improve I-10 and Wild Horse Pass interchange as part of the Prop 400 extension investment program. Construction for the funded components shown here are programmed in fiscal year 2025. Next slide, please. So the unfunded elements that are shown here in gray, which is the majority of the remaining 20 miles. The state has appropriated $85.6 million to widen the bridges over the Gila River. And taking into consideration the funding that is currently programmed, we have a shortfall of about 587 that will be needed to fully implement all the improvements identified. Next slide, please. So earlier this year, Governor Ducey in his State of the State address called for funding to widen I-10. The bill to appropriate $400 million has been introduced and is currently making its way through the state legislature. The project team is also discussing pursuit of federal discretionary funding coming from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, so the IIJA that Patrick just presented on. It is anticipated that the project would be extremely competitive under the National Infrastructure Project Assistance Grants Program, also known as MEGA. Under MEGA, up to $1 billion is available nationally for federal fiscal year 2022. And it sets aside $500 million for projects between 100 and 500 million in size, and another 500 million for projects in excess of $500 million. These applications are due May 23rd of this year. So next slide, please. So this item is on your agenda for information and discussion. Happy to take any questions you may have.
Oh, actually, go ahead, Mr. Mayor. Okay. So of the unappropriated dollars, you mentioned about 500 million. And we've got that date of May 23rd.
Yes.
So how much that would, in today's dollars, there's about a 400 shortfall, which could easily expand into much more by the time we get there. Is all of that eligible for the that grant application by May 23rd, or walk me through that piece?
Sure. So good question. Thank you, Chair, members of TPC. So the total cost is 807 million. So minus the currently programmed amounts that we have, the total shortfall is actually 587 million.
Okay.
So, should we get that state appropriation of 400 million, we still have a shortfall of about 187 million, and that's in current day dollars. So if we're looking at inflation, we're probably a little closer to $300 million. All of that would be applicable in the grant application that ADOT is currently putting together.
And with the grant application, and just say that we're looked upon favorably by our federal friends, what's the timing in terms of potentially receiving those dollars, or is that known?
So that the funding that's currently available is for fiscal year 22.
Okay.
And we would be looking to move into final design of the full corridor. So fiscal year 22, and looking to move into final design of the full corridor at the beginning of calendar year 23.
Okay. And if we were fully funded, would this potentially move up the project, or still the phase you first mentioned starting in 2025 construction because of the other steps?
So yes, based on the current schedule that we're working, we believe that construction would still start in 2025.
Okay, thank you. Additional questions or comments?
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
Do you mind going back a couple screens just for the, let's go one more. I understand the need for the I-10 running, and I know this has been planned for a long time. When we look at, if we're looking at the state to contribute dollars, and I'm looking at Governor Ducey's comments on this right now. He's looking to fund it with $150 million of COVID relief funds, along with some other things there. Would Pinal County chip in anything? Would there be any other funds coming from any other entities besides us, the state, the feds?
So Chair, members of TPC, good question. This is, like you said, an original Prop 400 project. And the funding, currently is a combination of MAG, so that it would be leveraged with the MAG current funding that is programmed, as well as the money that has been put for the bridge project.
I guess my concern is, and this committee has gone back and forth on projects for Prop 400 and 400E for years. Would this jeopardize any other projects in Prop 400 going forward to the end of the life of Prop 400, or tell us, because we're talking about a pretty significant shortfall. By your estimates, up to $300 million with inflation, that money is going to have to come from somewhere. What are the thoughts on that? What would come out of the basket to fund that, or would it not come out of the basket?
So the portion that is within MAG's funded region, or MAG's with the Prop 400, is currently programmed, except for the interchange at I-10 and Wild Horse Pass. So that has been identified as one of the extension projects.
We're not going to start, Eric, we're not going to start this project if we can't, or ADOT's not going to start unless they can complete it. So that budget shortfall has to be made up somewhere. And I'm just wondering, what are the prospects for MAG kicking in more dollars? Are we going to look at other agencies to help fund that shortfall? I guess is probably what I'm going to get to.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Transportation Policy Committee, Mayor Weiss, it'd be nice for Pinal County to contribute to this project relative to I-10, but as you know, their regional transportation authority has been subject to litigation, and they're still trying to figure out what to do, quite frankly. So unfortunately, timing is not going to work very well. MAG, as an agency, obviously we have Proposition 400 funds that we can spend in Maricopa County. We don't have similar funding that we can spend in the Pinal County portion. So if the grant application that ADOT's making and or the state appropriation doesn't come through and there is a shortfall, ADOT would have to look at probably breaking the project up into different bid packages to make it happen. Obviously, as Quinn mentioned, the Maricopa County section is funded. So the improvements down to Riggs Road and perhaps even the bridges could be funded and built. So the section of I-10 south of the Gila River crossings probably would be the section that would still need additional funding.
Until the lawsuit got settled or until other funding mechanisms were identified, correct, Quinn? Okay, thank you.
Good questions. So with that, is it possible that, and we don't know the latest concerning the county below us, and is there any new news with the lawsuit and the Pinal Transportation Authority, or is it still undetermined in limbo?
Mr. Chairman, members of the Transportation Policy Committee, we understand that Pinal County intends to have the ballot question on this November's ballot. I haven't confirmed that officially yet. I'm not sure that's been an official action by the Pinal County Board of Supervisors yet. So we certainly will continue to monitor that situation too.
Okay. Additional questions? Any online? All right. Thank you, Quinn.
Thank you.
Next on our agenda item is Regional Electrification Readiness Roadmap. And this is presented by our very own Audra Coaster-Thomas, MAG Transportation Planning Program Manager. And this also is on information and discussion.
Thank you, Chairman Harkey, members of Transportation Policy Committee. Glad to be with you here today. Talk about our forward thinking in terms of electrification readiness. Next slide. In light of advanced technologies and new federal funding opportunities highlighted by Mr. Stone earlier today, and to complement the work many of you are facilitating at a local level, either through climate action plans or other long-range planning activities, Regional Council Chair Mayor Giles had requested that we bring through to start a first of many conversations with our policymakers this month on how the region can best prepare for electrification future. MAG staff has committed to and has been forward thinking and coordinating across disciplines here internally at MAG to investigate planning efforts to support a systems-based approach associated not only with investment and as it occurs, but also to support making sure the region is well positioned to chase those discretionary dollars. Because of the strong link to transportation, we wanted to start this conversation with you today here at the Transportation Policy Committee in advance of the Regional Council meeting next week. Today's presentation will cover several items, provide a little bit of a regional context, highlight a few state and federal activities of recent, and then conclude by seeking your guidance and input into how MAG can initiate this development of a regional electrification readiness roadmap later this year. Next slide. So we'll start a little bit with some context and background. Next slide. This regional readiness roadmap is intended to create guidance for the region, outlining a set of recommendations for which we can advance electrification readiness throughout the Valley. This builds on work MAG has already initiated and conducted over the last several years, including research on how our peer MPOs or metropolitan planning organizations across the country have supported planning for and implementation of electric vehicle infrastructure. Next slide. I suspect there's a varying degree of familiarity with electrification and charging technologies. So before I went any further, I just wanted to provide a little bit of some baseline basics associated with EVs. And so before we start diving into actions at the federal and local level, wanted just to present here some baseline knowledge on electric vehicle and specifically its charging applications. Particularly for passenger vehicles, there's 3 levels of charging infrastructure. That level 1, think of it as the plug in your garage or in the hallway at your home, provides a trickle of energy to charge electric vehicles, gaining, depending on model and voltage of your home, between 2 and 5 miles per hour, usually taking over a day or 2 to complete a full battery charge of an electric vehicle. Level 2 chargers are the most popular option, particularly in a public-facing capacity, because it marries both an outcome of cost as well as charging needs. Level 2 chargers are applicable for both public settings as well as residential settings. A lot of households have those installed if there's an electric vehicle in the household. You'll see here for a level 2 charger, you're able to up your mileage rate between 10 and 30 miles per hour of charging capacity, allowing plugged in overnight largely to charge your battery fully. Level 3 chargers, or DCFC fast chargers, are typically the application you see along highway or freeway corridors for those traveling long distances. You'll see here provides a very fast rate of charge, up to 80% of battery capacity in anywhere between 20 minutes to an hour, allowing the driver to continue on their long journey. In public applications, you've largely seen clusters or hubs of these charging locations. You'll see we've included cost estimates for illustrative purposes only on this slide to give you a little bit of context, knowing these costs range and vary dramatically, and certainly do not include ongoing operations and maintenance costs, or even hardware and software costs that sometimes have proprietary obligations. Next slide. All right, so talking really about the evolution in technology advancement over the course of the last 10 years, significant progress has been made. Battery technology in particular has made significant strides, resulting in a variety of things, including the lowering of price, making more electric vehicles available, and including an additional number of models available in the market. We're seeing traditional manufacturers expanding their portfolio or pivoting away from combustion engines, and new entries to the market to provide new models of passenger vehicles. As you also can see in this graphic, these technology advancements have also resulted in a wider range of use. 10 years ago, the top performing passenger vehicle model could get you about 100 miles on a charge. We see many models now, 10 years later, exceeding 400 miles in just one battery charge of a vehicle. Next slide. Honing in here to some more local specifics to Arizona, approximately 30,000 vehicles are registered as electric vehicles in Arizona. We do have a high adoption rate compared to other states across the country. You see here, 6th highest number of EVs per capita in the country. About 1,000 public chargers across the state. The vast majority, 80 or 90% of those, are those level 2 chargers. And we have about 100 available level 3, or those fast chargers, available throughout the state. Next slide. So according to the Department of Energy, approximately 80% of passenger vehicles are charged at a residence or at home, and typically overnight, as mentioned earlier with the level 2 chargers. The real challenge is closing the gap for those who are either commuting or traveling long distances. What you see here is a map that our Regional Analytics Division put together that plots not only existing public electric vehicle charging stations here in our region, but underlying it maps employment density, or the location of jobs, a heat map, if you will, where you'll see the higher concentration of employment reflected in the yellow or red colors. And what you see here is that there isn't necessarily an adequate number of electric vehicle charging stations proximate to some of our employment hubs throughout the region. This is an example, certainly, of an opportunity we see to evaluate as part of our readiness roadmap. Next slide. Let's turn our focus and talk a little bit more about latest activity, both the federal and state level. Next slide. The current administration has outlined several aggressive goals associated with electric vehicles and adoption, including hoping to have 50% of the passenger fleet be electric vehicles by the year 2030, and with the intention to place and deploy 500,000 electric vehicle charging stations throughout the country. The goal is to build a convenient, reliable public charging network that can build public confidence, with an initial focus on filling gaps in rural, disadvantaged, and hard to reach locations. The administration, as part of the bipartisan infrastructure bill, have set aside $5 billion in formula funds directed to states over the next 5 years to help in this endeavor. 10% of that is a set aside to the Secretary of Transportation at his discretion to direct grants to states specifically to fill in gaps. There's an additional $2.5 billion available to support innovative approaches and ensure charger deployment that meets the priorities of the administration. This is through a discretionary grant funding opportunity. MAG, as you heard in our previous presentations, continues to follow the latest guidance and are looking for what regional funding opportunities might be available and viable, particularly through the a new program like the Carbon Reduction Program. Next slide. Alternative fuel corridors are the focus of the state charging station program. Corridors in Arizona are illustrated here on this map and are focused on mostly the interstate system. Through this new formula program, ADOT is expected to receive over $70 million over the course of the next 5 years to deliver electric charging stations along these corridors. As part of this effort, ADOT has initiated their required electric vehicle infrastructure deployment plan, which is anticipated to be complete later this fall. As we've mentioned previously, ADOT is expected to deploy about $11 million in this first year, targeting rural communities. What you see depicted on this map are existing charging locations across the state with an application of a buffer, so you can start to see where some of those gaps are in a statewide system, and specific focus most likely for that contiguous network investment. While there are spans that are greater than 50 miles illustrated on this map, we anticipate this to be some of the initial focus by ADOT. Next slide. There have been several coordinated planning efforts at the state level as well as through the Intermountain West. 2017 state governors in the Intermountain West signed on to a memorandum of understanding committing to a variety of activities related to electrification, including educating consumers, to reduce range anxiety for those that really want to prioritize adoption of EVs, coordination on EV charging locations, specifically to achieve a consistent user experience across these states. Next slide. Last year, the National Association of State Energy Officials in the Intermountain West completed a needs assessment, amongst other things, and highlighting particular areas in rural and underserved portions of this region. Their work outlined implementation activities focused on identifying best practices, creating voluntary minimum standards, and ways to leverage economies of scale. Next slide. And then also last year, the Arizona Statewide Transportation Electrification Plan Phase 2 was delivered for APS, Tucson Electric Power, at the direction, of the Arizona Corporation Commission. Amongst other things, this plan identified barriers as well as charging infrastructure gaps and talked about implications for these utilities associated with an increasing escalation of EV adoption in our state. These reference studies are just a sample of the work that has already been done and for which this region can build on with our readiness roadmap. Next slide. So this brings us to the effort that we're preparing to launch this year, the development of a regional electrification readiness roadmap. And we see several opportunities of focus. Next slide. You'll see here, whether it's establishing an understanding of current activities or forecasting future conditions, whether it's in battery technology or charging technology. While today's presentation has focused a lot on passenger vehicles, certainly important, we also want to be inclusive of commercial as well as transit passenger vehicles, to partnerships with Valley Metro and City of Phoenix Transit. We want to facilitate a gaps analysis and identify strategies and implementation tactics to enhance electrification readiness. And then finally, to define roles, responsibilities, and readiness action steps, including staffing and for not only for MAG and the region, but certainly at a local level to ensure that we're able to address and take action accordingly. These are some of the objectives we hope to achieve, in addition to how we can best take advantage of new federal funding opportunities. Before I move on and open up this conversation to hear from all of you, I do want to point out this photo that is included on this slide. This is a new commercial product that we're seeing deployed in parts of the country, namely in Colorado, where it's a modern take, if you will, on that traditional corner convenience store, providing fresh foods, prepared products, but also, as you'll see here on the variable sign, not only the delivery of a per gallon fuel of unleaded gasoline, but the opportunity and the market rate being charged by the convenience store for electrification charging. So while this photo was clearly taken a few years ago, given the price of gasoline included in this photo, I think this is what we're going to see more of in the future, and excited to follow this as part of this readiness roadmap. Next slide. So today's item is on for information and discussion. As noted today, this is going to be the first of many conversations that we'll have over the course of the months and years. However, it's important for MAG to best understand what's important to all of you, to be able to cover and include in this readiness roadmap as part of this effort. So while this completes my presentation, I'll turn it back to Chair Harkey to help facilitate a conversation. Thank you.
Great. It would be obviously helpful for us and you to stick with your questions initially.
Mayor Harkey, members of the committee, these are simply for discussion starters in case there was an opportunity where we were wondering what we wanted to discuss. These are some things that might be helpful to MAG staff, but we're certainly looking for any feedback that you have today.
Great. Thank you. Why don't we start to my left, work our way around. Mayor Weiss.
I love the presentation. I love how we're going to get ahead of this as much as we possibly can. I think we need to be careful of the government statistics that come out about projections in 2030. If you listen to car manufacturers, they're talking somewhere of the implementation of electric vehicles somewhere between 25 and 30% at the most optimistic, and that includes hybrids. So I think we need to just take that with a grain of salt and kind of see where we're at going forward. I also think there's a lot of technologies that are happening. You've got, sorry if I sound like a car geek, but it is what it is. You've got Toyota coming out with the solid state battery, which will effectively double the range of electric vehicles. They're getting ready to roll that out in their new vehicles. So that'll be interesting to see charging dynamics that go along with that. Mercedes just rolled out a test vehicle that got 1,000 miles on a charge with the same size battery pack as a Tesla. Let's see what that happens, because that changes the game. If people can get 1,000 miles on a charge, then infrastructure charging stations become less important. They just do. People can charge at home. When they get to where they're going, they can charge at if it's a long trip. So I think we just need to watch the technology over the next couple of years. I'm also wondering, as we get into this, what role do corporations outside of traditional gas stations play? There was a story about Starbucks adding charging stations to their new stores. So people come in, get a thank you. So people would come in, get a cup of coffee and charge their vehicle. And I'm wondering what real corporations, when you go to the grocery store, will you be able to do the same thing? That takes the impetus off of government funded charging stations and allows corporations to do that. For local efforts, I think almost all the cities would have some type of charging facility at their city hall, at their facilities. How do we build on that for the public? In Avondale, we have it at our local libraries. We're looking to build on that. And I think that plays an important role also. And honestly, the policy questions are, for me, is this organization going to be is going to guide the future of charging in the metro area, or will we take a more substantial role? And I think that's a question we have to answer. Will we get involved with charging? And like right now we fund roads, we fund bridges, we fund a lot of things. Does that mean that we get involved with charging infrastructure as a budget item? So those are questions to answer, but I think there's a lot of things that are still out there, but I'm happy with the direction that we're taking right now.
Thank you. Continuing on my left, further comments?
Well,
Mayor Giles.
thank you. Great presentation. And I think the demand for electric vehicles is obvious to all of us, not only the passenger vehicles that we're driving ourselves, but as the operators of large fleets. I mean, I think this is really going to play a major role in our city government response to our transportation needs as well. So I think it's important that MAG take a leading position on this. Clearly, this is the regional transportation planning organization. We are the stewards of transportation data. This is really our wheelhouse. So I'm excited and hope that MAG will kind of push the envelope a little bit and make clear that this is a space that we feel like we need to occupy. I love the presentation. The term roadmap is a little ambiguous to me, because I think we need a strategic plan to make sure that we not only are responding to, I think that my understanding of the funding is that a large amount is automatically going to go to the states, and we're going to need to make sure that we're encouraging and supporting the state and receiving those funds and getting them into our hands as quickly as possible. But also there's going to be a round of competitive grants that follow. And I think if we come, with shovel-ready projects in hand, hopefully we'll be at the front of the line for those competitive grants. And then as a roadmap might suggest, I think this organization needs to be involved in deciding where these stations are going to go. We don't want to have, a station in Mesa across the street from a station in Tempe, or a station in Mesa across the street from a station in Gilbert. And I drive all over the valley. I don't want to be stranded in Goodyear or Gilbert. I think we don't want to be overly parochial about where these stations go, because it's a regional, situation that we're confronted with. So
Maybe stranded is not the best term.
have the fortunate opportunity to visit more time than I had planned in Goodyear, perhaps. Might be a better way
You
to
could
say it.
have worse things happen to you than be stranded in Goodyear or Gilbert. So,
Just call me. I'll join you for lunch down in the Heritage District.
Thank you. I see I hit a nerve. I don't want to be stranded anywhere, but I would love to visit Goodyear and Gilbert, I guess is a better way to say it. So I guess, obviously, the role for this organization to play, I think, is obvious. And so I hope we embrace that. Again, let's run to the front of this parade as hard as we can, because we don't want to be, second in line when it comes to federal funding. So thank you for the presentation.
any more to my left? Mayor, let's go ahead, Mayor Gallego.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for bringing this forward. Last year, we heard a little bit when we had the EV update about some of the things the utilities were doing, and I think it's very valuable to include them in our planning process, as well as there have been some private employers who've been real leaders in this area, and a few cities have electric vehicle plans. We, at our last week council meeting, did a debut of our plan, and we're now in public comment, and we're looking at a variety of different things, from how we work with building codes to we're actually looking at what some of the things Chandler's doing that's very intriguing to us, to trying to lead with our own city fleet. our budget this year will include additional investments in our electric vehicle staff at the city. I hope that MAG can be a regional voice as the state develops the plan. I would love for us to say that many of the charging decisions should include both employment centers as you mapped out, but I think also population centers as well. There will be a real push to have DC fast charging along the freeway corridors, but I would love to see level 2 charging distributed throughout Maricopa County as well. I had a wonderful interview with a British publication who asked me if Maricopa County was going to be the new motor city, but for EVs. And I wouldn't mind if we were. And thanks to some of the great investments that cities and partners have made, we do have a leadership role, but those companies, as they continue to invest, will want us to be on the forefront. And I think MAG might be able to provide comments saying that most electric vehicle trips in Arizona will occur in Maricopa County, and that should be a priority as we allocate the state's charging infrastructure so that we get our fair share. This may also be an opportunity for us to work together on the significant autonomous electric vehicle investments that are happening in the county. So Chandler was really on the forefront of autonomous electric. And as you've seen in downtown Phoenix, it is looking like it will be coming here soon. I would love it when Super Bowl comes if we as a region really talk about our smart tech investments and that we are leading the country in that area. I think that would be good branding for us, and we have a really good story to tell. And this may be a forum where we can really make sure we coordinate that messaging and put that forward. But it's the eyes of the country are going to be on us. And to me, this should be one of the stories we are telling. We're helping modernize the American economy. So would love to continue that. So I guess just to recap, I think we need to bring all the stakeholders who've already done EV plans together and make sure that we know what they are doing. I would love to see an opportunity for us to comment on the state plan and then coordinate regionally on the economic development messaging, in addition to making sure we get our fair share of infrastructure and Jobs Act funding. And I guess, are we going to do a formal comment, and how will that happen on the state plan?
Chairman Harkey, members of Transportation Policy Committee, Mayor Gallego. ADOT has, as I mentioned, initiated that effort, has invited MAG to participate as part of that. I believe there were some invitations beyond that, perhaps at some local level or local agency levels. As soon as they kick off and engage, we'll be at the table and be sure to be bringing not only back information coming out of that effort, but be a voice for the region to the state.
So do you want us to share ideas, or you'll come back to us and we can pause until then?
Chairman Harkey, members of Transportation Policy Committee, Mayor Gallego. I think we're going to wait until ADOT actually formally invites us to initiate the plan, and then we'll be happy to bring back what their intended outcome are, and then look for your advice and feedback to take back to ADOT.
Wonderful. And in this roadmap, are we thinking we're going to set goals? So coverage of the county in terms of charging, or charging within, the average resident has a charging opportunity within a certain number of miles?
Chairman Harkey, members of Transportation Policy Committee, Mayor Gallego, we can certainly look at that. That's the kind of feedback we're looking for today. If we want to set regional targets as part of this planning effort, we'd love to get your feedback.
Okay. To me, that is valuable. I've appreciated with some of our regional collaboration and being able to share those goals. And I think puts us on the map. We have a smart region collaboration as well. And I think that would be worth including here. To me, that is good branding, that we're not just smart cities, but a smart region, and can be on the VAT at the front end of innovative companies calling the region home and deploying their technology here.
Let's go to Mayor Orsborn, then to my right, then to those online. Mayor Orsborn.
Thank you. I'm kind of late to the party on the electric vehicles. I don't have an electric vehicle. I just have a smelly old diesel truck. And yeah, right. And I understand where we're headed. This is clearly the future. I almost had an electric vehicle, but they decided not to locate in Buckeye, so I canceled my order. But yeah,
That's cool.
it's cold. The question is though, are we deciding that we are going to be the gas stations moving forward? Is it the government that is the de facto fuel station or energy station moving forward with these, or are we talking about the backbone infrastructure and us working with the power companies to put in that to where you have locations where the private sector puts in the refueling locations? Because we don't, and I know comparing gas and or diesel or whatever the traditional fuel to electric is it's not really apples and apples, but and it no different than the picture that was put up that showed a fuel station with gas that we all yearn for, the $2.45 cost per gallon. And in that same location, you have the ability, I think I understood from that, you can charge your electric vehicle for 15 cents a whatever that was. So I think from my perspective, that's what I envision, or maybe something that is all electric moving forward, that is a private company. It's, Love's Truck Stop that has a series of charging stations, or it's something else, some other brand that has that, but it's private industry that's providing those pay for locations for people to recharge their vehicles. Sort of rambling, but does that make sense? Is that where we're headed, or are we saying that we're going to be building those locations and then maybe hiring a contractor to operate those locations?
Chairman Harkey, members of Transportation Policy Committee, Mayor Osborne, I think it's a combination, a little bit of both. Certainly the latter, though. I think the focus for this roadmap is intended to put together a framework and also better understand what market conditions look like, better describe the role and commitment that MAG and our member agencies have for electrification readiness. So certainly that we intend to be part of this strategic plan, as Mayor Giles has deemed. But I think there's also an opportunity, as illustrated by the federal infrastructure package, that there is funding to advance and particularly focus on underserved areas that we certainly don't want to sit idle on and be ready to take advantage of, because that funding is gonna, if it's not coming here, it's going to go somewhere else in the country. As Mayor Gallego said, make sure we get our fair share.
Okay.
And just as putting on my mayor hat, as each of us probably are, I mean, I could certainly look and see, are there some either zoning perks if someone wanted to put in something where perhaps it's zoned for something else? We could certainly engage in that as a city, as well as maybe even offer some incentivization, particularly to a corner thing of that would be replacing something that is not like that now. So I think we're going to have a lot of tools once this comes out. So,
okay.
All right.
Thank you.
To my right.
Okay. Actually, when the comment was made by Avondale's mayor about 1,000+ mile capacity, I'm thinking it's gonna be some long police chases, days long. I actually had a meeting last week with a private company, and they had brought up several issues. In fact, we have another meeting scheduled in about a week, but things that the mayors all are going to have to deal with, and that's our codes, a way of permitting. And he gave me an example of one of the cities that they recently done. Their particular codes in their city didn't allow for these charging stations to be done on one side of a wall. In essence, they could put them on the other side of the wall, but when they had ladies working late at night, going out at 10 o'clock at night to the opposite side of the wall where it was dark, well, then you're putting people in jeopardy to be attacked. So those are things that I think we're going to have to deal with a lot. This company is looking to come in to Arizona specifically and open up charging stations, which they will then make a profit from. So I don't know as though we're going to have as much that we're going to be responsible for as private enterprise is going to want to take advantage of that. But I think the thing that as much as I would like to try to ignore it, we cannot ignore it, is we've got to figure out a way to pay for our roads. And as this electrification continually keeps getting more and more and more advanced, you're talking 50% potentially in 8 years. How are we going to pay for our roads? I mean, that's where I think we really need to buckle down and start looking at those type of issues, whether it's per car registration. I'm totally dead set against the idea of a tattletale where you pay by the mile. I don't like that. I'd rather pay by the registration, but we also want our visitors as they come here and we have places for them to charge. We want them to pay for our roads also. So I think that it's got to be much more inclusive. And then the other thing I would suggest all the mayors start thinking about doing is work out a plan as new homes are being built in your cities, that you encourage the home builders to set the homes up with a 220 line in the garage immediately. It's incredibly inexpensive to do when it's being built. And I think it sends a great message that your city is trying to set the standard for clean air. So we did that with one home development, and where we thought we might have some pushback, it was just the opposite. They loved it because now they have a product that nobody else offers. And they were able to do it at a far less price. And of course, selling homes right now isn't an issue. That's pretty easy, but that's just some thoughts that I have, but it's coming.
Mayor Harkey, just really quickly, I think Jerry touches on a point. We can talk all day long about batteries and the infrastructure, but it's when you touch on road improvements, the roads still need to be improved. They still need to be maintained, whether they're combustion engines or whether they're batteries. I think having MAG, having MAG lay out a policy that the legislature can work with and the governor can sign on to, whoever the next governor is going to be. I think that's just as important as what we're talking about up there, Jerry. So that's a great point.
We've also started doing the kind of the incentivizing of home electrification too for that. So it's popular.
We're not
For new
incentivized, we're
developments.
just telling them to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Continuing to my right.
I agree with what Mayor Osborne said about coordination with private providers. I think it's important that we not be tripping over between the government and between private providers of electricity, because I can see that they will probably become much more prevalent over the next 5 to 10 years if these projections of electric vehicles are accurate. The private industry is certainly going to jump into that to fill that void. So I think it is important that we coordinate with private industry, or at least try not to trip over them in these plans.
Mr. Step.
Sorry.
After you.
No, thanks. Obviously can't let the first meeting go without saying anything, right? And I appreciate everyone else on the committee defending the stranded in Goodyear comment as well. But I certainly agree with everything that's been said, and I think finding the place that is right for government in this operation is key. One of the things that seemed to resonate with me in the presentation is there's been a number of studies already done. And I would certainly hope that we are not going to duplicate what has already happened. There seems to be a lot of information already out there that perhaps this may not be as deep a study as we tend to think that it is. And the conversation has been very enlightening. We have not yet had that, and I've picked up several things that I'd like to bring back. So I appreciate all the conversation today.
Mayor Wires brought up the concern that I have, and I've been listening to this conversation, and I have not heard anything about the gas tax equivalent or the highway user tax or whatever it's going to be called. And I'm wondering if all of that electricity that's being provided presently, is there not some kind of a tax that is being recuperated to help with the roads? And it appears that there's not. And I didn't hear anything in the presentation about that Mayor Wires brought up. And that concerns me. I've been here 22 years, and we've only talked about every 22 years about raising the gas tax. And what's going to happen if half of that goes to vehicles? And so I'm concerned about how we pay for the roads, as was mentioned. Push your button.
I'm the only trucker here in the room, I think. And at Swift Night Transportation, we have a very large fleet. We've always been very careful about our resources. And we have put a fair amount of energy into the electric vehicles. And I'll just, in the Port of Los Angeles, which you've probably heard about, there were three of our facilities were just a few miles from the port proper. And the electric company in Los Angeles said that they wanted us to have some electrical trucks. And would we do it? And we said, yes, absolutely. We'd like to learn from that. And so everyone went to the first one of our facilities, and everyone looked at all the different parts and where you'd have to park and all these other things for the electric vehicle. And everything stopped because with one electric truck, we were okay. When we had two electric trucks that were charging, it turned all the lights off. So we said, okay, well, we'll go to our next facility, which was just a mile or so away, and the exact same outcome. And our third one that was relatively close by, the same thing. So the utilities have a lot of work to do, and a lot of the grid is not very robust. It's just barely enough. And during the summer, when it gets hot in Los Angeles and all along the coast, South Coast, everyone has to turn off their electricity during that period of time to keep, you don't have those blackouts for, all of Los Angeles. So this is not, I'm not throwing a wet blanket on anything, but well, it's a heavy lift and we can do it, so it is possible, but it's going to take, it's not going to happen overnight, and it's going to take time. And there's a lot of smart people working on this for us and for other people as well. So we're on board, and, but there's just a lot of problems we have to work our way through.
And I'll comment next and then go online and then a couple back here. You really bring up something that I would like us to better understand, which is a grid study and summer peak load study. We heard this last summer that California was encouraging people not to drive, and this might be anecdotal and urban myth, but so I'll own that as a possibility. But the last thing I think we want is to be telling our folks first to buy an electric car, you're helping reduce emissions, and then telling people that they shouldn't drive their electric car because we don't have the grid to support that. At my 48-year-old house in Chandler, I have to be strategic at Christmas when I put up lights. Under my old system, when I would put up all the lights and turn on the microwave, suddenly I would be popping circuits. So I am concerned, particularly in some of our not brand new areas where we've got new growth that they can accommodate this, but in Central Phoenix or in some of the core of each of our cities, do we have the infrastructure that could take this robust? And I just think we need to better understand it, not back away from it. But I do have a lot of concerns. Could we even handle on a 115, 120 day in the middle of July, whatever the further electrification of vehicles, and what does our power companies have to say? And at the same time, we're reducing emissions by looking at electric vehicles. But if they're going to have to turn on additional generators because peak hour is not solar, is that going to create some complementary problems that we just need to study before as we embrace this. So those are my thoughts and concerns. Can we go online and then double back? Anybody online have comments or questions?
Chair Harkey, this is Jen Daniels.
Go ahead, Jen Daniels.
I'm so glad we're having this conversation. We are due and it's so relevant. We've been hearing a lot about this at ADOT and the effort that they have underway to be ready for the application that's due in August. But I do believe that we may be missing some key partners at the table when we're having this conversation. And I think you just touched on it, and that's our utility companies that are providing this electricity. I also firmly believe that we are going to need a new financial model in order to allow our private industry, be it the Circle Ks and QTs and Chevrons and all of those of the world, to be able to convert in a business, smart business way for them to be able to also provide this resource. I think we also just cannot forget that technology is going to be ever evolving in this space. There is something called dynamic charging that we may be talking about in 10 years or 15 years at this same MAG meeting, Transportation Policy Committee meeting, that allows you to embed infrastructure within your roadway and charge while you're driving. These are all technologies that I know are being worked on and have the capacity to transform conversations that we're having today, 15 and 20 years from now. It's going to be very difficult for us to stay abreast, but I think agility matters and making sure we have the right individuals at the table having these conversations. I think it'd be wonderful if MAG could create some sort of subcommittee that allows us to partner with our utility companies and other experts in this field, because we want to go where the ball is being thrown to rather than trying to sort of chase it down where it is. And I think we're going to need to be a little bit more strategic about how we approach this with a longer lens in mind.
Thank you, Jen. Anyone else online have comments or questions? Okay, any follow-up questions in our room? Mayor Weiss.
I think what we've heard is a pretty good cross-section of kind of what this committee wants to accomplish. And I think if we're going to set a policy, I think everything that has been brought up, the grid issue concerns me. And I think, does that mean that charging will be limited to nighttime when the grid is not as heavily used? There are things that go into that. And I think we also kind of need to look at as an organization, are we going to include certain technologies and exclude certain technologies? Does hydrogen play a role in what we're doing? Hydrogen is still many years away, but there's companies that are still working on it. What other technologies are out there? But I think the key point is, will the current grid support what we're trying to do? And we need to get that question answered from our friends at APS, SRP, and TEP. So.
Mr. Anderson.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, members of the Transportation Policy Committee, thank you for the great discussion. This has been a really good and wide-ranging discussion, which really gives us a lot of food for thought, quite frankly. I think Mayor Weiss initially and many others have hit on the technology issue, and that's something that is very difficult to keep up with, obviously, and dynamic charging is here. In fact, SANDAG, our sister agency in San Diego, is perhaps doing a pilot for dynamic charging in the roadway. So we're monitoring that situation too. And they also have an installation in Michigan that's doing dynamic charging too. So we'll see kind of how that pans out. There's also new charging technologies that are really rapid charging with cooling technology, and heat is the big culprit when you charge a battery. So there's some cooling technologies in play too. So we continue to monitor that. With respect to utilities, we have been involved over the past 2 years with Arizona Thrives, which is a multi-stakeholder effort initiated by Patrick Graham of Nature Conservancy when he was head of that And a lot of discussions in Arizona Thrives about the role of the utilities and how the utilities need to be prepared for electrification. So we are engaged in those discussions right now. Obviously the power grid is extremely important, not only for transportation, going to be more important in transportation than it has in the past, but it's something that we do have to keep our eye on. And thank you, Mayor Watt, for, I think it was Mayor Wires brought up the how we're going to pay for our roads. That's something that does keep us up at night as we look at the continued electrification of the fleet. So once again, thank you for the discussion. Very robust discussion, covered a lot of different territories. So we really appreciate the good discussion we had here today.
All right. Mayor Woods, comments.
Great. No, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Really, I'll be very brief. I just wanted to say, my big thing on this, electrification of fleets, is very important in the city of Tempe, and I think, frankly, throughout the region. And I guess the only thing I'd really like to point out is I really would like to make sure that MAG is sort of continuing to play kind of a big role in the planning process here as it comes to the collection of data, because I do think that this is going to be very important for the entire region. And I know that, as an example, we're kind of working through this sort of, regional infrastructure exchange right now. And I just think that in order for us to make really smart planning decisions over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, that we have to have a really kind of robust data collection. And I think that MAG can play a very critical role, and all the mayors in the room can, in making sure that we get that done. So whatever we can do to make sure that MAG does continue to play a very critical role in sort of getting all of that data, I think that would be very helpful, not only to the city of Tempe, but I think, frankly, for the entire region.
All right. Thank you, Mayor Woods. Well, I think we've talked ourselves out. We've spent our charge on this one. There you go. Good comments. Clearly nobody professional. Next is our thank you, Audra. Next is our legislative update by Nathan Pryor, MAG Policy and Government Relations Director, and he's going to introduce contract lobbyist John McDonald to give a report, or are you doing the same?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll introduce Mr. McDonald. Today, we're going to focus our conversation discussion around the state legislative session. So with that, welcome to day 101 of the Arizona State Legislative Session. And yes, Mr. John McDonald is going to come to the podium now. John is with Policy AZ, MAG's state contract lobbyist. So with that, Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Nathan. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committees. Good to see you all. I'm John McDonald. I'm with the firm of Policy AZ, representing MAG, and along with my partner Dana Paschke, working on MAG's behalf at the Arizona Legislature this year. I thought it'd be good maybe just to give you a couple of minutes about where the legislative session currently stands, and then I can talk about the issue that's really of most importance here, which is the extension of Prop 400, or as we refer to it as Prop 400E, at the state capitol. As Nathan said, we are day 101 of a 100-day session. The session will go on as long as it needs to. There is a rule that it has to end after 100 days, but if it doesn't end in 100 days and you have the votes, you waive the rule and you keep going until you're done. So that's the way it works in Arizona. We are now in what I would consider to be the later stages of this session, though it certainly is anybody's guess as to exactly when the session will end. We are past, with a few exceptions, we are past the committee process and the deadlines that needed to be met for bills to continue through the process. That has now passed us by. We are now in the stage of the session, other than the appropriations process, which is sort of a separate issue that has to be handled through committees at some point, including this morning when appropriations bills, budget bills were heard in committee, probably still are as we speak. So we are now in the place where bills that have survived that committee process are now moving to either the floor of the House or the floor of the Senate for ultimately passage or failure on the floor. And that's where we're at, and that's where really Prop 400E, in this case, Senate Bill 1356, is at in the process. I think overall, the story is we're pleased with where we're at. We met all those committee deadlines. We achieved the goals that we wanted to achieve in terms of moving these bills along through the process, but we are not done yet. We have a significant amount of work left to do. Senate Bill 1356, which is really the bill we're focusing on now, even though there technically is a second bill that's sitting in the Senate right now. For today's purposes, I'm going to focus on Senate Bill 1356, which is sponsored by Senator Tyler Pace, who has done just a tremendous job of advocating for this. He's been a great champion and has really done all of the behind the scenes work and the out front work to help move this bill out of his chamber, the Senate, and over to the House. The bill went through the Senate, obviously, to start. And when we were completed with that process, we achieved the necessary votes to include the emergency clause on the bill. In any bill in the Senate needs 16 votes to pass. In order for the emergency clause to be attached, it needs a minimum of 20. We had 21. So we were very pleased with that outcome. The bill then moved over to the House, went through the Transportation Committee there, where it was shepherded by Representative Frank Carroll, who has also been a great champion of this issue and has worked very hard to not only move his bill, which was a companion to this, but also help shepherd Senator Pace's bill through his committee, which it passed a number of weeks ago and is now ready to move through the Rules Committee and onto the House floor, where we will need to achieve a 40 vote margin. The minimum threshold is, of course, is 31 votes in the House. The House is 60 members. You need a minimum of 31 votes to pass anything, but for the emergency clause, we need 2/3 or 40 votes. So we will need to achieve those 40 votes in the House. We are positioned to do so. However, the House is a tough slog here. We certainly knew that pursuing a tax measure at the Arizona legislature is difficult in any year, and this is no exception. We knew this was going to be a difficult fight. We were quite certain that the House was going to be the tougher battleground just because of a larger number of members and a really diverse set of legislators within the Republican caucus. We're confident of our votes in the Democrat caucus, but the Republican side is tougher. And we knew that going in, and that's the point that we're at right now. So combined with really trying to make sure that our vote count is up to 40 or greater, along with being at the point of the session where bills tend to slow down because you have a House and a Senate and a governor that are all trying to negotiate in any given year the state's budget, which tends to take a while, and the parties are jockeying for position in that case. We also have at least two other issues of huge importance to the governor, to the legislature, which are water and the issue of taxation. There is the replace and repeal move that deals with the ballot proposition from 2 years ago. So there are some very large financial taxation issues that still need to be dealt with internally. There are a number of different issues on water that both the governor and the legislature need to take care of before a lot of other bills can start to move, including Senate Bill 1356 or Prop 400E. So we, along with a lot of other entities and a lot of other bills, are in a bit of a holding pattern as these other issues are worked out. What we need to do is make sure that we are in position to move that bill through the Rules Committee onto the House floor when the time comes for that to happen. When is that time going to come? We really don't know. It really depends on a lot of different things. Mostly it depends on when the negotiations and the discussion and the votes have occurred in some form or another on water and on the taxation or finance issues I mentioned earlier. When those things and the state's budget is going to need to get to a certain point before I think House leadership is ready to move other bills, including Prop 400E, to the floor. When that happens, we need to be ready to go. We need to make sure that we have all of our votes lined up. We are in a good position, but we have more votes to count, especially on the Republican side, to make sure we have that 40 minimum votes that we need for the emergency clause, which will help us when it comes to the bill actually being ready to move onto the ballot in November of this year. So that is a 3-minute discussion on a much longer item. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Mayor Geiger.
So how can the members of the TPC help?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Mayor Gallego, that's a great question. The time will come, certainly, and it could be a week from now, it could be a month from now, it could be 2 months from now, when you all can be very important in this process by contacting those members of the legislature, particularly on the Republican side of the aisle, but certainly on both sides, to let them know how important this is to our local economy, that this bill passed, 1356 passes, gets signed by the governor, and that this ballot measure moves to the public in November of this year. All throughout this process, we have had input and help from all factors of the community. Members of the audience sitting here from the city side have been very helpful in working through this process. Members of this committee have spent a great deal of time interacting with legislators. The Business Coalition has been terrific in making sure that members understand that this is extremely important to our local economy. But all of you will be called upon again here shortly to make sure that you are doubling back with those legislators from your districts, from your communities, who represent the locations of your business interests, to make sure they understand this bill is important. It needs to go to the floor. It needs a positive vote, and the governor needs to sign this bill. So that time will come soon. We need to be prepared for when that happens. So be thinking about, to answer your question, Mayor, be thinking about those members that you have a solid relationship, and make sure they know and continue to know and continue to hear from you how important this is to make it to the House floor. The reason I'm so emphatic on that point is when this point is reached in the session, when these other issues are starting to clear out and it's time for action, that's going to happen very quickly. The session will speed up greatly at that point because everybody wants to get done and go home. So it's going to move slow for some time now. Again, a week, 2 weeks, 2 months, we don't really know. But when it happens, it's going to happen quickly. So I would say be ready to go. Thank you for the question.
Additional comments or questions? Comments or questions from online? Thank you so much, John.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members.
Committee, our next item is number 9, request for future agenda items. Are there any requests by a TPC member for a future agenda item? Seeing none in the room, hearing none online. Going to item number 10, comments from the committee. Are there any comments by a TPC member for anything else? Seeing no comments, hearing none from online. That concludes our meeting. Have a great day. I'll get those.